We're going to get to a couple of listener questions before we get out of here. There was one I saw. It was from our friend Royal Flush 513. What about Michael Johnson playing a little bit of defensive tackle? To me, I think this makes a ton of sense. And to me, I think that the potential of some of these guys kicking – the guys like Carl Lawson and Jordan Willis coming in on third downs, on passing downs, coming off of the edge, gives the team flexibility to kick in a Michael Johnson, a Carlos Dunlap inside, maybe with Geno Atkins. Maybe you actually spell Geno Atkins. He is getting up there in age a tiny bit. So maybe you kind of just mix things up. But to me, this makes a lot of sense. And if you watched the game against the Redskins in the preseason, you would have seen Michael Johnson get a sack against the Washington Redskins starting offensive line from the interior on a third down. Your thoughts on Michael Johnson getting looks at defensive tackle? Obviously not a true defensive tackle by any means. I'm assuming this means passing situations, that sort of thing. Obviously, the wingspan and the reach also helps on passing downs when he's inside.
Yeah, and I think it's a good question. I'd totally agree with looking at something like that, because I know they're not the exact same size, but Wallace Gilberry, we did something like that with him, and they may be looking. I know Gilberry and I think Chris Smith are similar sizes. I don't know if that would be another option they might look at, because you're looking at third and long in a pure pass situation, unless they run a dump off screen or something or a draw play. You're trying to get the quarterback. You're trying to get your best guys there. Someone like Pat Sims probably isn't going to be confused for J.J. Watt, kicking inside, getting to the quarterback that way. So if you he's tall enough, he can probably bat some balls down, lined up in the middle, kind of like Lawson or Dunlap does on the outside. So I would have no objection to it. He's probably a better pass rusher than Pat Sims or Andrew Billings at this point in their careers. And we've done things like that in the past. Other teams have done it. I don't see any as a fan, I don't see any reason not to do it. I don't know if there's anything, team-oriented locker room scheme where they would say, it's a dumb idea, fans don't know what they're talking about. But from the outside observer perspective, it seems like something that makes sense, because you want your four or five best pass rushers on the field in those situations. And if you think he can do it better than one of your guys who normally lines up a defensive tackle, why not try it and see what happens?
And while the Bengals, I mentioned earlier, they don't blitz often in terms of bringing additional pressure. They like to bring four. I think they're one of the lowest percentage in terms of defenses that blitz extra players. They try and find talented pass rushers that can win one-on-one battles, can get through double teams, and that's largely who they have. Geno Atkins can do it. Carlos Dunlap often does it. And now you've seen a lot of good things this preseason from Carl Lawson and Jordan Willis. So, I think they're going to do that. And what they like to do by getting those types of players is they like to mix and match. They like to spell certain players. And if you look back to 2013, 2014, 2015, when the team's defense was top notch, they did a lot of rotational stuff up front. They did a lot of they still had their best players in there often and very frequent in terms of Atkins and Dunlap, but they moved things up. They got creative and without needing to blitz necessarily, right, Scott?
Yeah, and that's and you look at who they have a defensive tackle. I mean, at least where he's at in his career right now, Billings, Sims, Ryan Glasgow, none of them are probably going to start the year making you, as an offense scheme, we have to stop this guy from getting to the quarterback. So if you have someone else you can put in there, and one thing they always say with Michael Johnson is, he's great against the run, he just can't rush from the outside. Okay, you're still kind of covered in the run if they do a draw play or something, and if he can get the quarterback a little better, then I think we have to, whatever we have to do to get, and I've kind of preached this on the offensive side too, whatever you have to do to get your 5 best offensive linemen on the field. And if it's not, Bodine, you have to find someone else that can play center to get your 5 best people there. And same thing on defense. When it's a pass rush situation, you want to have your 4 or 5 best guys because they aren't blitzing. And when they do blitz, I don't know if it's the scheme, they tend to get picked up more often than not. And then the quarterback usually finds the open guy and we get burned. And so I think that's maybe conditioned them not to blitz as much. And I think we saw it in the Super Bowl when Atlanta was doing really well in the first half before they decided to, I guess, give that game away. They were getting pressure with their front four. And if you can get pressure with the front four, you can do all sorts of things in the NFL. And that's the key. So whatever you can do to get your pressure from the front four, it doesn't have to be the four guys that started. It has to be the four guys that, hey, on this play, these are the four best pass rushers right now in this rotation that are going to be in on this particular play. And if that means moving Johnson inside, then yeah, you move him inside.
Yeah, I'm really interested not only to see, because the Bengals got rid of some of those guys that were versatile pieces up front. Marcus Hardison, a guy who played an edge rusher in college and was labeled a defensive tackle with the Bengals. Wallace Gilberry, a guy who was an edge rusher that also moved inside on passing downs. So I'm really interested to see kind of what the Bengals do up front with some of these guys. And I'm really excited to see what Jordan Willis can do. Not that I'm not excited about Carl Lawson, but Jordan Willis – I said this on a Facebook Live post that I did. I think that Jordan Willis, you can make the argument that he was one of, if not the best Bengals player the entire preseason. Now, preseason, we all know, doesn't mean a lot, but he was a guy that went up. He still was going up against starters, second stringers. He wasn't going up against just scrubs. Had 4 sacks this preseason, 1 sack per game, multiple pressures. On the other hand, Carl Lawson, too, had some plays, and he made a nice play against Trent Williams, an all-pro left tackle for the Redskins, forced what ended up being an intentional grounding, what should have been a sack. So I'm excited for those two guys, aren't you, Scott?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big things. You look at OTAs and training camp before the preseason games. It was all Lawson, and then the game started. You're like, wow, this guy isn't the freak that Lawson is, but Willis is a really good player when you put the pads on and you go against these guys. And I know PFF was really big on both those guys for whatever that's worth coming into the draft. And Bengals fans generally were pretty happy we got both of them because it addressed the need and they seem to be good values. So you just kind of hope that the Bengals figure a way to put them on the field. And I think they probably will. But when you see the depth chart and you see Michael Johnson as the starter and ahead of both of them, it kind of makes you wonder, well, are they going to put him out there? Is it more of the same? I think preseason spoke volumes. Training camp did that. Hey, these guys can play. It wasn't against ones, but you have to put them out against ones. And you say Trent Williams. Obviously, they did go up against some ones, and when they were out there, they did really well. And so if our offense can get leads, force teams to throw, and if we can get this pressure, there's no reason to think that they can't be a solid pass rushing team, which we weren't last year.
Yep, and that's a good segue into our last question of the night from Matthew Lawless. I'm not completely sure as to what he's referring to here, but he asked the question, do any rookies win more snaps this week? I mean, it's not going to be one in practice, if that's we talked about Allen Iverson recently too. Practice. It's not going to be one in practice this week or anything like that. It would have been one in preseason. This is a team, we've talked about it a lot, Scott. This is a team and a coaching staff that really really likes its veterans, really likes the steadiness it gets from veterans. It's a weird dichotomy because they like the veterans, they like the steadiness, but they prefer the draft. They prefer to build the draft and get these young guys. It's kind of a weird philosophy to me, but I think obviously the Bengals are comfortable with their veteran guys up front, Dunlap, Johnson, and Atkins, for better, for worse, especially with Johnson for a lot of people. But, I think, at least I hope, that this preseason really opened the eyes of the coaching staff in terms of what Willis and Lawson can do. I think there were times where Margus Hunt impressed in the preseason, Dante Moak impressed in the preseason, but it wasn't to the same consistency. It wasn't against the same talent as what we saw from Willis and Lawson. To me, and when they weren't getting sacks, it was pressure. Now, that doesn't mean that Willis should be starting against Johnson per se. Some people believe he should. But I think that some of these guys should be getting more looks on defense and not just special team snaps. One other guy before I kick it to you, Scott, that was kicked around a lot, and he's really the only day, I believe, one of the few day 3 picks. Well, I guess if you go rounds 4 through 7, one of the only late round picks, Jordan Evans, who made the team based on the other guys who were cut or on IR. That's a guy that's being talked about a lot in the YouTube chat as well. A guy who did a lot in the preseason to show that he could play linebacker and really was physical.
Yeah, and I think if we're looking at someone who, I guess if we're looking at a rookie who we think could wow the coaches in week 1 and earn more playing time, we've talked about both Lawson and Willis. Unfortunately, I guess I'm jaded from the whole Carlos Dunlap experience when for his first year or two, every time Carlos Dunlap went out there, you're like, wow, this guy's really good. This guy's really good. The next week, it was Robert Gather starting. Robert Gather's getting 80% of the snaps. Dunlap would go in occasionally. Wow, this guy's really good. So I'm not quite ready to say they would have a chance. So I guess the one guy I'm thinking, and he's a rookie as far as playing time, not so much by draft year, would be William Jackson III. Even though he's not listed as a starter, I think once they see him go out there and see what he can do, I'm assuming he's going to end up with more snaps than Denard playing opposite Kirkpatrick. He's someone that I think there's probably enough athletic ability, enough natural feel for the position. Obviously, I'm projecting because we haven't really seen him play in a real NFL regular season game. He's one who I think could impress enough, especially with AJ or with Adam Jones aging. The team could say, hey, we have something with this first round pick we made last year. Let's not do the Drake Kirkpatrick thing, keep him on the bench for 3 years. Let's make this guy a starter, or at least give him substantial playing time, rotate him in frequently with our, really old, multiple arrested cornerback, and make this, transition him to being a starter with Drake Kirkpatrick, who signed long-term, so that going forward, we have these 2 young guys, both locked up for the next, 3-4 years, whatever, as our, big, tall, athletic corners of the future. So he's one I could see, but yeah, he isn't a veteran, so you never know.
Yeah, I'd like to think that some of these young guys are going to get more snaps. And again, this is we talked. I mentioned earlier about the dichotomy between the Bengals' philosophy of the draft and veterans and all that kind of stuff. There's also a weird dichotomy of Marvin Lewis in wanting to see a player, quote unquote, practice the right way, and also, a former coach that I am, you also know that there are guys who just plain perform better in game situations than they do in practice. And they're, the gamers, if you will. And, there's a fine line to walk. And when you see, maybe Jordan Willis wasn't the greatest practice player, but when he got on the field, he just performed. So, I don't know. I think in the fact that Marvin Lewis doesn't have a contract extension, the fact that, he's in his last year might signal the fact that he might be a little more open to, hey, let's get the best guys on the field regardless of who they are. You mentioned the running backs earlier. That was a point I wanted to bring up. It's going to be obviously they want to get the ball in the hands of Hill, Bernard, and Mixon. Hill and Bernard have had roughly 200 to 250 or so touches a year since they've been with the Bengals, total touches. And behind them, Burkhead's had the occasional touch, but not really much of anything. So it's going to be interesting to see how they end up splitting all that up now with Mixon, who could very well be the best of all of them in terms of amount of touches and all of that. So, there's a lot to sort out. I would like to think that the Bengals will be more open to letting the young guys get more snaps. We'll see if that's actually the case. Scott, let's get out of here with maybe some By the way, Nate McGuire in the YouTube chat says William Jackson is my baby. So he must be a big William Jackson fan.